After like a year's hiatus from this series, it's time to get back to it. Left 4 Dead has a pretty deadly strain of virus known as the green flu, although to be real, this thing is much worse than any flu you've probably ever had. With the ability to mutate the human form into many different versions of itself, many different variants arise with one purpose of infecting holdouts more effectively. This is more than likely due to the high mutation rate of the virus's genetic base. Regardless, there is a creature created in particular that's brain and mental status are rooted in what is essentially a natural chemical overdose. So let's try to figure out what makes the Jockey from Left 4 Dead so spastic. Overall, the Jockey is very skinny for an infected and is considered to be one of the smallest infected. It gets its name from the riders who ride horses in races, which is pretty fitting as this creature rides humans much in the same way. Its sinewy appearance and laugh give it an overall unpleasant and very ape-like look, as well as its movement seems to mimic apes' form of locomotion as well. This particular virus has interacted with the genome to give this person almost a baboonish appearance. Now, it's been a while since we started here, so let's start from the feet and work our way up the creature, or really due to its stature, we will work our way to the front of the infected. The generalized structure of the foot hasn't actually changed that much. It is possible that the size of the foot has changed to give the infected a more stable footing, but even with this possible size increase, it's not too pronounced. Their feet will be caked in blood from presumably previous victims, which will run up the entire length of their calves to the knee. It can be assumed concerning the strength of the feet, however, because the Jockey prefers to jump and stay up high, say from the top of buildings, that these feet must have had the bones strengthened to some degree. When concussive force great enough in a magnitude is applied to tarsal bones, they have a tendency to shatter. This implies that the bones of the limbs may have been hardened, much like that of the tank, to adapt to their new way of hunting and landing. The arch of the foot appears to have been increased as well, which is where the strength of this foot actually comes from. We all know arches are excellent building techniques as it transfers pressure and force to the ground. The similar process could be happening concerning the Jockey when it lands. But also it would seem that for the bones to change like this, more bone would have likely been added, allowing the feet to have this necessary durability. Moving on to the legs of the infected, we can see that its stance is very awkward. I don't know about you guys, but my normal walking stance doesn't have me constantly squatting. The stance is going to be very wide, with the legs being about shoulder width apart and the lower legs splayed more open. Another thing to note about the legs is their overall shape. On canines, felines, predators in general, they all possess something called digitigrade structure of the leg. This means that they are going to walk on their toes and balls of their feet rather than the flat portions and heels like we kind of do with a plantigrade structure. The Jockey almost appears to be adopting this phenotypic trait with its more forward-leaning posture, causing it to constantly walk on its toes and not its heels. There's also a theory that states that perhaps the Jockey was paraplegic and confined to a wheelchair. This would explain why the overall muscular nature of the legs is not too pronounced. The legs appear to be somewhat skinnier, with the quadriceps being about the same size as the calves. While we do see muscle alterations to most other infected, it's pretty clear to me that the lack of muscle in the legs does indicate maybe there was an issue in life with their pre-infected form. The abdomen area sports very little fat, if any at all. The abdominal muscles are clearly defined, but this brings to mind that this is probably not the case prior to their infection. The green flu has added some muscle to this creature, and this appears to be one of the areas affected. This would make sense to see why the abs would need to be developed, as when the Jockey latches onto someone, the abs kind of come into play to make sure they keep control and steering the human in a favorable direction by providing counter pressure to a person trying to stand up straight. The chest is also more well developed as well, with the chest muscle connecting to the anterior deltoid in particular larger, with more muscle existing around the clavicle of the Jockey. This would be useful when latching onto a person. To anyone who has ever done a pec fly at the gym and thought to themselves, man, I'm gonna be really good at hugging, that's exactly what the Jockey is thinking too. This helps him wrap around another person's torso and hang on. This also helps keeps the victim's arms pinned to their sides and can control what a person can and can't do concerning movement. The shoulders and upper arms kind of show that this person used to be before this transformation took hold. Very skinny and with very little definition. This is mainly going to concern the biceps, triceps, and deltoids, as they aren't really as necessary when holding on to potential prey. However, the anterior deltoids that connect the pec muscle are going to essentially be very well defined and much larger than normal, or even proportional. The reason for this is clearly because that the muscle is directly involved with holding something close to your body, like a delicious human torso. The anterior deltoid runs the length of the front shoulder into the bicep and contracts with a fair amount of force. Then we get to the forearm forearms. Someone has been eating their spinach, it seems. The forearms have been increased in size and perhaps even length. Halfway up, covered in blood, it may not be for a reason that you think. Before getting to that though, it can also be presumed that the bones in the legs and feet have been strengthened so that the forearm bones may have been hardened as well. This would give the jockey the ability to hold on tight and not have their arms broken when it braces itself from falls or attacks on other humans. Circling back around to what the blood on the forearms are, now the blood could be from survivors, but I actually think it's coming from self-inflicted injuries because now we move on to hands. The hands of a jockey are almost comedically large, about 1.5 times the size of a forearm, which also kind of like side note, cool thing you can do. But then again, what really constitutes cool here, if you bend your elbow at a 90-degree angle and you take your palm and fingers and you place it into that forearm part of your arm, they should be about roughly the same size, which they usually are in lengthwise. So I don't know, it's just kind of something I've noticed since I was a kid. Anyways, imagine having another half a hand there in length, and that'll give you an idea of how long these hands are actually going to be. Tipped on each fingers is a bit of a claw, which I will now explain about my previous point about self-inflicted wounds. When the jockey mounts someone, they will jump on them, wrap their arms around them, and locking their hands around their forearms. With the length of their hands, they could easily completely wrap around the forearms, or then probably at least once. As a non-infected person who's about to turn into a snack, you would probably be struggling quite a bit, and because of this, its own claws would more than likely slice into its own skin, causing blood to come out of the forearms. This is also why if you look closely, you can see wounds on the forearms as struggling people have caused slices to open the skin. Moving back up, we see a skeletal structure as well as musculature of the back and how they have changed. The spine is in a more of a hunched position, so instead of having an S curve like you or I, they will now have like a giant C curve or a severe Quasimodo look, I suppose. But the spine itself also appears to be bolstered and increased in size, which would mean that it's also going to be stronger. The muscles on the back have been increased concerning the upper portions. The latissimus dorsi muscles appear to not really have had that much mass added to them, but for the most part, it seems like the erector muscles and posterior deltoids, all of which would be a counter to the abdominal muscle, allowing for more dynamic control of a person, have actually been increased in size. So one of the hypotheses I come up with concerning the jockey, just by looking at it, it seems that it may have had a spinal disease similar to kyphosis, giving it a hunched appearance. It's also possible that the jockey may have been a paraplegic or was in a wheelchair before the infection, which may explain why its legs were so clearly atrophied. Again, this is hypothetical, but the structures on the body do seem to suggest that this is a possibility. The head of the creature now sits forward, which is a very unnatural position for the head to sit in. Imagine looking up and then bending forward. This is how this creature now lives, almost like the head position of a quadrupedal animal. Surely the spine still connects at the base of the skull rather than at the back of the skull, so I imagine there is vertebrae in the neck, but it had to have been altered quite a bit. The face of the jockey is pretty normal for the most part, barring the complete lack of lips and skin surrounding the area. The jockey appears to have either bitten them off or clawed off the skin surrounding the mouth, and we will get to why this was the case very soon. This has exposed the teeth and what appears to be a very skeletal looking smile. With its physical characteristics covered, let's see what causes this behavior in jockeys, shall we? Well, it's pretty clear to me that the virus has had a major impact on the brain, whether causing infected to become constantly hungry, the tanks to have unrivaled rage, or the depression that we see in the witch. Continuing on, this is almost an instinctual trend. The jockey is affected emotionally as well. Mania appears to be present in the jockey, which is caused by high levels of dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. How do I know this creature is experiencing mania? Well, my viewer, let's take a look at the symptoms. First, let's cover what appears to be the presence of norepinephrine levels, which are elevated, like to astronomical proportions. When too much of this hormone is released into the body or brain, it can have a whole host of symptoms, but mainly it can cause weight loss. We see very little fat on the jockey in general, and the skin appears to be sucked to the muscle. Now, this person could have just been really skinny regularly, but increased levels of norepinephrine could have this effect on them. Next, with increased serotonin levels, we see tremors and muscle twitching. When you play as a jockey or run into one in general, it's clear to see that the body is twitching and they are experiencing muscle spasms almost constantly. But at the same time, we also see the agitation and restlessness, which can be a symptom of high serotonin levels. When we see the right arm constantly shaking, whereas the left hand is twitching, it's pretty clear that this could be caused by a multitude of factors, but I would put my money on degradation of the neural pathways. High hormone levels can cause this degradation to the neurons and nervous tissue in the area, with some being affected more than others. For the right hand, this has caused almost Parkinson's levels of effect to cause constant shaking. Perhaps this person was right-handed, which seems to have an effect on usage, leading to more degradation quicker. The left hand only twitches as it was used less, but as the pathways degrade more, I imagine the left hand and arm will join the ranks with the right in constant shaking. Next is everyone's favorite chemical chemical dopamine. With high dopamine levels, this would explain the cackling we hear from the jockey and why they make it all the time. Basically, the jockey is high on life right now, or high on infection. The dopamine levels would also explain the muscle twitching and odd posturing of this creature, but also in a lot of people, increased levels of dopamine lead to excessive salivation and tongue burning. The tongue burning in particular is of interest, as this could lead to the infected clawing at their own mouth, taking out most of the skin surrounding the area of their mouth to try to remove their own tongues. These three hormones come together to create a creature known as the jockey. Prior to infection, it is presumed that perhaps they were mentally unstable as a person, and they could have been experiencing manic depressive episodes of bipolarism, and this person would more than likely have been smaller in stature. Upon their infection, rather than continue with the lack of chemicals that their brain normally produces, they are flooded with hormones leading to mania and morphological changes. Another option is a person who was previously paraplegic. This would explain the atrophied legs and larger upper bodies, as this is how they moved. After infection, their bodies mutated, and clearly this caused nervous tissue to bridge the gap somewhere in their body, leading to their paralysis, or fixing their paralysis really now. However, the muscle still has not increased enough in size from their previous life. The purpose of the jockey is to stalk the rooftops looking for any and all who may be taking safe haven up there. If anyone should be traversing the ground below, the jockey will leap onto them and begin riding this person toward infected and their ultimate demise. The jockey, being weak, doesn't have the ability to game menu like the other special infected can. He's really just sort of a team player, and also really annoying online. Luckily though, due to their small stature and weakness, they are relatively easy to put down with just a few shots, but they should still be given the respect they deserve, which is very clearly a shotgun blast to the face. See you in So that about wraps up the episode for the jockey. I hope everyone enjoyed. Leave me a comment if you think that the jockey could be something else rather than what I believe it to be, because I'd actually like to hear some ideas. Great to be back on the Left 4 Dead train. I will drop my Twitter, Patreon, Discord, and merch links in the description. Shout out to a few of my patrons specifically: Joseph Givens, Laffy No Skill, It's Not a Spoon, A. Laurantis, Arteem Shornage, and The Lone Titan. Thank you guys, and thank you to everyone else on Patreon. You guys are ballers. Alright, so that about does it for me. You guys have a good one, and I will see y'all in the next one.